What an honor it is absolutely to be with you here today in this city, truly historic city, and this is a historic moment. We're going to create it. As it is our African tradition, before I, as an invited guest, do address this village, I think it only fitting and proper that I would also ask permission of the elders to speak in your village. Permission has been granted. I want to say greetings to each and every one of you. How are you feeling today? You feeling black?
Yes.
You feeling strong? Yes. Feeling black and strong? Let me hear you say yeah. If you feel like nation building, let me hear you say yeah. Yeah. If you feel like, in the words of Marcus Garvey, that we can accomplish what we will, let me hear you say hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
That's right, because we have to testify.
Hey.
We have to get those hormones flowing. Because we know that we as African people have accomplished incredibly great things since the dawn of human civilization. And we want to make sure we can get your connection here, okay? And I am just really excited to be here. This is a kind of a re-entry point for me. Because a few years ago, I was constantly on motion around this country. I think I put in 100,000 miles in 1 year. I drove over 40,000 miles to reach our people, to do, I wanted to duplicate what Marcus Garvey did when he came to this country. In 1 year, he traveled 38 U.S. states.
That's right.
And I was able to accomplish close to that. You know, Marcus Garvey, it's good to walk in his footsteps, but you know, he got huge feet. And so I was able to get 24 states in within a 1 year period. And it really gave me a good impression of who we are, where we are, and what we are prepared to do.
All right.
On one hand, you have reason to be incredibly optimistic. Incredibly optimistic. And then on the other hand, there's them cousins of yours. Them African Americans. They're not doing so good. They need our help. Now, if there are any African Americans in the room, we're glad you're here. Because when you leave, you're going to be African again. And that's such a beautiful thing. Such a beautiful thing. I also want to thank our beloved Queen Sister Nzinga for a fantastic interview. A fantastic interview. I get a chance to do a lot of radio interviews, and sometimes the interviewer kind of gets in the way of things. And you're blessed to truly have this queen delivering such a great thing. Now, I've never been accused of coming to a lecture without enough to say. I have written 21 books. I have published about 80 different research reports. I've done everything to excess. I have a number of the CDs and videotapes and things. I have 800 CDs now in the archive. So I will have to speak a little bit fast because the Great AIDS Hoax lecture that you're going to hear tonight has never been heard before. I'm going to be incorporating some critically new data into it. In fact, I've really got to write a new book for all the new data that we have. Because in the age of AIDS, 2, 3, 4 years is actually a rather long time. Even though certain truths are essential, and truth hasn't changed since Imhotep.
All right.
And so that's why we reach forward to Imhotep, to Ma'at, to the Nile Valley, to where we built on truth. And those institutions that we build are still there for the world to examine. Despite all of the assaults and the attacks that the Arabs, the Romans, the Greeks, and everyone else came through, the French, the British tried to steal everything.
Yes.
The Germans tried to steal everything that the British didn't haul away.
Yes.
They all did what they did, but guess what? The well springs forward ever. Because we are the well. We are the volcano. We are that source of black lava from which all life grows and springs on this planet. An African woman, you are the essence of creation. So as a black man, and this is why I'm speaking on this subject today, as a black man, I vow to every African woman in this room, to every daughter, to every niece, to every grandmother in this room, I vow that I will commit my life, and if necessary, sacrifice my life, so that the women can carry our spirit forward to another generation. Some of the brothers have to signify that. Come on, let me hear the lion roar! Let me hear the lion roar! We have to let the women know that we're black again. We took these little diversions, chasing things that were not productive. We're black again. Am I correct, brothers? Yes, sir. We're black again. We have to show the young brothers that we, the older brothers, are not effeminized.
Right.
I'm going to keep the language proper so that all of the elders can approve everything that I say. It's very critical. And also, I let all the young brothers know that, the poets, the rappers, etc. Always, when you're speaking to the elders, make sure that they're going to approve every word you say. Speak slow enough so all the elders can hear everything they say. Because when you speak, and it is proved by the elders, you will know victory every day of your life.
That's right.
That's the life you want to lead to all of our young brothers. So, we got a great presentation today. This presentation I've given a number of times over the course of a few years. And to say the least, it has shocked a few people. And it should shock a few people, because when it comes to the subject of HIV and AIDS, the overwhelming majority of people, no matter what perspective we have still missed it. It's a rather simple thing, but it's been so complicated because the fact is the white man lies.
All the time. All the time.
No, I'm telling the truth.
That's his nature.
And when he tells one lie, he tells 4, 5, 6, 8 more lies to reinforce that one lie. And then, if he builds his foundation upon that lie, and he's got to now invest a lot of money in perpetuating the lie. The African American AIDS thing costs this man $400 million a year to perpetuate a lie. We're going to take his lies apart today. I'm going to thoroughly take his lies apart. Now, before we begin, I just need to get a pulse. How many people in the room, and it doesn't matter whether you answer yes or no, but I do want you to participate. How many people in this room are convinced or have been convinced that we are at peril from a thing called HIV and AIDS? Raise your hand real quick. Okay? How many people in the room know someone who has been diagnosed as HIV antibody positive? Raise your hand. Okay. How many people know someone who has, quote, unquote, died of AIDS? Raise your hand. Okay, how many people in the room know somebody who is currently suffering from this condition and even pronounced full-blown AIDS and might be sick? How many people in this room know somebody who's taking chemotherapies, AIDS drugs, know somebody who's taking them? Okay, all right, that gives me a good measure of how deeply that thing has penetrated this room at various levels. I'm here today to tell you the whole thing has been one of the greatest hoaxes ever perpetuated. One of the largest fraud, phony hoaxes, lies, distortions, all of the, you know what the word hoax means. Right. One of the greatest. You know, the greatest one is that thing called religion, but we're not going to go there today. We don't necessarily have to go there today, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
We do.
So, we're going to, let's get the screen up, and then maybe we'll dim the lights just a little bit. Now, the screen is it's acting up a little bit over here. Let me see if I can get this over here. Just bear with me one second. If I can get this straightened up. Okay. Everybody might have to lean to one side. I think we'll be able to get it here. And okay, we're going to be talking about the great AIDS hoax. Can everybody see that? I know it's a little cockeyed, but that's okay. We've been living in America to know long enough to know that everything is a little cockeyed. Yes, that's right. That's right. Now, I've got my pointer here, and we may need to turn on the light just a second. Let me see where I put the pointer. All right, let's go. We're ready to go. All right. The Great AIDS hoax. Population control disguised as public health policies. And I've been collecting this data. I first began my studies of this subject called HIV and AIDS. Oh, thank you very much. I first began my studies of the thing called HIV and AIDS in 1987 when I was traveling as a musician. Word had come down that this new phenomena, then about 3 years old since the official AIDS, this new phenomena was the consequence of a biological germ, genetically engineered in the laboratory. That someone had taken bovine visnovirus, or bovine leukemia virus, and sheep's visnovirus, and somehow using an enzymatic process had spliced these things together and created a new superbug that was specifically engineered to target, single out black people and to kill them off. I believe that. Yes, I'll take all cell phone calls. Anybody who calls, they want to talk to me, okay? Either that or turn it off. I so believed it, and because my father, I grew up in a household where my father was a chemist. He was an industrial chemist. George Howard was his name, of some renown. And because I had been exposed to science all of my life and had the capability of comprehending science at a fairly high level, I said, well, let me take it upon myself. Let me call it my duty to understand this for my people. And so as a consequence of that, I started collecting every document, every paper, every story, every book I could find on this subject called HIV and AIDS. And I do believe that I have one of the largest collections in this country of AIDS documents outside of a library situation. And I have just huge amounts of these things. I traveled to libraries all over the country collecting these documents. I've been 4 times down to Emory University, which is home to the Centers for Disease Control, to the Allied Medical Health Library, which is the largest medical library in the country. We took a group of us, went to Johns Hopkins on one of our previous trips. We had Johns Hopkins looking for this data and other data on psychological warfare and human experimentation, which they're doing a lot of psyops development, and a lot of human experimentation is run through Johns Hopkins University. And that's one of the things I'm going to be talking about tomorrow, is the amount of human experimentation that takes place in this city on young blacks, especially black women. I've been finding it for years, and it keeps coming back to Baltimore. And they couldn't keep doing it if we weren't somehow participating in it. Remember, the Tuskegee syphilis study could not have gone down had not black people, doctors and nurses, cooperated with it. And we can never, ever lose track of that, because collaborators are one of our greatest problems. We have not come up with a process for neutralizing collaborators. Anybody agree with me? The Great AIDS Hoax, population control, disguised as public health policies. We're going to talk more about population control tomorrow in the lecture entitled, Who is the New Ku Klux Klan? Amongst many of the documents I collect are a lot of what are called salacious propaganda. Propaganda that's really targeted at the most ignorant mindset. And it's very unfortunate because far too many of us are repopulating propaganda that's actually targeted at a very low level of thought process. This one here is, of course, targeted at Latino, Hispanic people, the fastest growing ethnic minority within the United States border. And that's kind of flaky too. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But this one here says almas perversas, perverse stories. Examen de virus de immunodeficiencia SIDA, positivo. HIV tests, positive. AIDS, positive. El SIDA era su arma, su perversión contra Carlos. In other words, it says AIDS was her weapon, her perversion contaminated them. So let's go forward on this. Now, much of these excerpts, and excuse me if it's not all on screen, but we're doing the best we can with what we got. Much of what you're going to see today is from my 3rd book on the subject called AIDS, the Establishment Confesses It's a Hoax. Okay? Let me just get this little baby off the screen. Okay, oops, let's go back. Bear with me here. Okay. Much of this comes from my book, AIDS Establishment Confesses It's a Hoax. And we're just going to go through this. Unfortunately, I don't know why, but it's not projected on the whole screen. Contempt for the masses. Hopes rise for inexpensive AIDS drug. Researchers in Los Angeles and Washington have identified what may be the first inexpensive AIDS drug. This document found on the front page of the LA Times, February 6, 1998. A finding could be of major importance for the 50% of HIV-positive Americans not receiving treatment because of its cost. That's very critical because you have to understand how AIDS is linked to poverty. This is why they always put HIV testing centers and treatment centers right next to housing projects. This is true all around the world. AIDS and poverty are directly linked. They also say that the drug, in conjunction with 2 other AIDS drugs, has induced what could be a permanent remission. They talk about this drug called hydroxyurea. And they also, in the document, they also said that it had been previously not only testing it, but using it in sickle cell patients. Who are sickle cell patients? Who are the 50% of AIDS-positive Americans not receiving treatment because of its cause? Mostly black, and then a few other non-black intravenous drug users. Well, this miracle drug, they call it hydroxyurea. Now, my daddy was a chemist. A long time ago, when you see these big, long, complex syllable words, you just break them down into the root components. It's medical lead. It's a sentence inside one word. Hydroxyurea. Hydrogen and oxygen, you know that. Combine those two, you get H2O, water. Urea is from uric acid, root word of urine. This miracle new cheap AIDS drug is commonly referred to as piss. PP, TT. Number 2, golden shower. Ronald Reagan called it the trickle-down theory. So, and unfortunately, I don't know why we're not seeing the whole screen, but we're going to just go forward through this to the best of our abilities. Medical meltdown. AIDS, our impact with the truth wall. This is a quote from my friend Michael Elner. In fact, I interviewed him on my radio show yesterday. In an interview, it was a superb interview. We called it Kicking a Hole in the Bucket Called AIDS. And he gives this quote, which I've got to have the bottom of this. I may have to do something different here if it's not going to show. I don't know why it's not showing the whole thing. Okay, we'll do the best we can. Medical meltdown. AIDS, our impact with the truth wall. The HIV/AIDS fraud is the initial point of impact between an insane society and the approaching brick wall of truth. Speeding recklessly along on this inevitable collision course, the interrelated social problems of squeaking wheel, dimming tail brake, cracking windshield, and shaking body. You know how that car of yours is. You keep driving it. Have for years been reassuringly disassociated into the seemingly unrelated problems of racial violence, immune deficiency, psychiatric disorders, and poverty. A solution to AIDS? Well, if we don't ask the right questions, we will not get the right answers. Yes. Was the HIV hypothesis simply a scientific mistake? Or was it simply a matter of scientific fraud? Well, one could argue it either way if you take the jammed accelerator out of context. But I, like the great men in this movement, I too feel that AIDS is just one of a multitude of urgent and interrelated threats to the future of humanity. And let me get this last little bit on here. The last little bit on here, it says, in fact, why don't we do this? No, it's not even worry about it. It says, but like many, I feel that AIDS is just one of a multitude of urgent and interrelated threats to the future of humanity. Just look at us. Everything is backwards. Everything is upside down. Doctors destroy health. Lawyers destroy justice. Universities destroy knowledge. Governments destroy freedom. The major media destroys information, and religions destroy spirituality. Is he telling the truth? Yes. Absolutely, he's telling the truth. Okay. Let me see. I can get this thing on the screen. Let me do this real quick. Bear with us, because of the flight and everything today, I didn't really have time to come in and get set up the way I normally do. But we're going to be all right. We're going to do all right. No, it's not the screen. It's just I needed a little more time to set up. We'll do the best we can. In fact, here, I'll just use it this way. This is actually better. Okay. So, all right. Okay. Now, using black propaganda. How many of you have heard of the term black propaganda? Okay, black propaganda basically means, you know how white folks, everything evil is black, right? So when they say black propaganda, they mean propaganda, which is not a bad word, just the ability to propagate your ideas. But black propaganda is propaganda that undermines. So this is white people describing, or actually this is Information Project describing what they call black propaganda. They say the fact that the audience is carefully and systematically led to a particular set of beliefs is especially dangerous because the source of the ideology and the motives of the sponsor are not known to the recipients of the messages. In fact, the use of local collaborators, that's your nurse Eunice Rivers, and she's all over the place now. $400 million a year to pay for local collaborators in the black community alone. Financing of indigenous news operations, meaning buying off your media, and the like only confirms that the propaganda has to be falsely attributed in order to be credible. The messages, in other words, the message is made believable by the fact that it appears to come from within the target population itself. This is what is known as covert or subversive propaganda and black operations. And it is generally acknowledged that much of what is conveyed through such campaigns consists of false information. So we talk about this gravy train called AIDS. From Don Francis, one of the men who actually created this whole thing, the Epidemic Intelligence Service. Anybody ever heard of the EIS? They're called the CIA of the CDC. And you can get caught up in alphabet soup, but you really need to know how these agencies really work. See, people want to quote headlines from newspapers and say it's from the CDC. I know who's tricking and who's not because I know the studies that they're quoting, the newspaper studies, and the newspapers, remember what they said earlier? Mass media destroys information. They tell you, well, we'll show you examples of what they do. The American HIV prevention program should be the place where the best and the brightest come, where the action is, where history is being made. This is the epidemic of the century, and every qualified person should want to have a piece of the action. Don Francis, retired officer with CDC's Epidemic Intelligence Service. You want to be a guinea pig? Let's just skip this, but I'm going to be talking more about this whole subject of human experimentation tomorrow. But we found out that they came into LA, and through one story which appeared in the LA Times, and a little bit of controversy which it caused, we chased down this man, this European man of Ashkenazi descent, who was in LA covertly running 6 human experiment trials, and they were specifically looking for young black women in the housing projects to experiment on. They were looking for HIV negative cohorts to experiment on. So when we talk about another Tuskegee, let me tell you, Tuskegee was awful. Am I telling the truth? Yes. Tuskegee was a long time ago, and the stuff they got out right now makes Tuskegee look like a walk in the park. It's far worse. Why would it be worse after Tuskegee? Because African American leadership has been delinquent. We've not been vigilant. Brothers have not been defending the women of their village and of their family. Brothers have been abandoning the women. The women go to these free clinics and stuff. And as soon as you go to the free clinic, you are in somebody's experiment. We were so complacent, we allowed them to put these clinics in our high schools, and now they're experimenting on our daughters. Injecting them with Depo-Provera, sending them out of state to abortion clinics because they know that the parents wouldn't approve of it. So these white lesbian Ku Klux Klan members can come in our neighborhood and do anything they want. The Ku Klux Klan comes through, we want to stop and fight. So he says, well, I'm out. I'm going to send in the lesbians. I'll tell you the damage they're doing tomorrow. It's going to shock you. We talked about this thing called HIV. This is real critical. We talk about what is happening here. Is this really a disease or is this something else? This one was one of the ones they were doing in LA. Project Open Window. You're on the 10th floor. You got an open window. You're in trouble. LA County Acute Early HIV Infection Project. This is one of Peter Kern's experiments. The purpose of Project Open Window is to target the minority communities in LA. What did I say or did they say? For identification of primary HIV infection and acute retroviral syndrome, meaning what they would call early HIV infection, which is a fancy way for finding early HIV. Yet there are several significant problems. One, the symptoms of acute retroviral syndrome are fever, swollen glands, sore throat, fatigue, weight loss, muscle and joint pain, night sweats, nausea, and vomiting. What's that sound like? Diarrhea, pain in the fingers of feet, headache, or stiff neck. These are exact same symptoms of influenza. And the year that we discovered them doing this was, according to the CDC, the worst flu season in 22 years. They were getting all of these numbers of blacks, especially black women. And especially when they brought the churches into it, the number of black women that they were get into their HIV net, that's what they called it, an HIV net, started to go up dramatically. And two, to determine advanced retroviral syndrome, project coordinators wish to screen the potential Project Open Window client using a series of enzyme immunoassay tests, which you will learn in excruciating detail later in this report. They do not work. The HIV test is one of the biggest lies. So I say stare into the face of pure evil. In a manner reminiscent of Tuskegee, Dr. Peter Kern has been quietly conducting AIDS studies in poor minority neighborhoods. But I was on a radio interview just a week ago out of New Black City, out of St. Louis, and they put me on with a white Ashkenazi doctor out of New York called Dr. Stephen Karpiak. And I tried to, while we were on the show, do a research on it, because I want to know, who is this can I use the cracker word? Yeah. Who is this cracker I'm on with? Because the cracker was crazy. He was crazy. He's supposed to be a science, an AIDS scientist, and I'm trying to talk science, and he's just crazy livid because he knows, do not engage people like me in scientific debate. Go crazy on him. Call him liar, 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 pants on fire. And I'm trying to bring it back to, okay, well, let me cite my references. Let me ask you for references. He couldn't give up nothing. What he could do is hang up the phone, and it became his own worst argument. But by the end of the program, I finally got the spelling on his name right and found out he's in New York doing the same thing, experimenting on black women and black children. And I'm going to skip through some of this. There's just so much. Propaganda versus science. Black people, we need to stop. We need to stop being anti-scientific. We need to stop quoting stuff we don't know about. We need to stop it when one cracker comes in our neighborhood telling us all the things we need to know, with no verification, not asking for his credentials, not asking for his references so we can take him into a library and see if he is reading the document correctly. We believe all of these Anthony Hilders and Robert Streckers and William Coopers and John Colemans and all of these other crackers. David Icke. If anybody ever quotes David Icke to me, I'm going to spank you. Because if you're quoting David Icke, your problem is not the system that's organized against you. Your problem is lizards from the planet Pleiades. Quoting these jive, I'm not going to cuss. Quoting these jive crackers, many of whom secretly work for the intelligence networks anyways. Some of them not so secretly. And even quoting some black people telling you it's the same nonsense. If you give a man the correct information for 7 years, he may believe the incorrect information on the first day of the 8th year when it is necessary from your point of view that he should do so. Your first job is to build the credibility and authenticity of your propaganda and persuade the enemy to trust you although you are his enemy. We got that one from right here. A psychological warfare casebook from Johns Hopkins University Press. How many of you have ever been into Johns Hopkins libraries? If we have some time, maybe one day, I don't know if we're going to be able to get it in this late in this trip. Normally a Saturday morning, I would like to take 10 people in there and show you how to go into their libraries and pull the ammunition out of their guns that they use to shoot at you all the time. Show you where to find the human experiments with your nieces, your cousins, your daughters, your high schools. The students are in those experiments. No, they don't name them, but they will tell you the facilities they're at. And you know if they're at the facility, you know who the black nurse or doctor who's the collaborator is. Right. Taboos must be breached. For population control to succeed, a great deal more must be done than merely establish family planning centers and to provide surreptitious funding for local advocacy campaigns. An entire spectrum of variables affecting the desire to have children must be influenced, from basic economics and government programs to family relations, personal expectations, lifestyle, cultural traditions, concepts of land sharing and private ownership. You know, two black adults can't even live in a house together anymore. Mexicans can do it, and then they buy the whole block. Wealth production systems, ethical standards, and even religious beliefs. Taboos must be breached. The bonds that unite family and community must be undermined. And sufficient disruption must occur to literally disorient the targeted communities and make them vulnerable to the imposition of external cultural forces. The so-called African American is an external culture.
Right.
How are you going to take two hostile civilizations and bridge them together and say, I'm African American? It's a schizophrenic. I'm a schizophrenic. I'm sitting on the fence between two warring civilizations. If you're sitting on the fence when two groups are at war, if you're sitting on the fence in the middle, who gets shot first? An African American is calling yourself, I'm a black European. You can be what you want to be, but be careful, as Stevie Wonder said, when you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer from superstition. Read behind the headlines. We got to stop quoting headlines. Man contracts AIDS from the bite of prostitute. Remember that story? 1995. Florida health officials say a 91-year-old man contracted the AIDS virus from the bite of a prostitute with bleeding gums. The CDC stopped short of confirming it as the first known transmission of the deadly virus through a human bite. CDC spokeswoman said, we have not confirmed that the route of transmission was a bite. But that's okay, it was a clever headline anyway. And for people who only need a headline, it was the truth then. Propaganda, weapon of war. Psychological warfare, the planned use of propaganda and other psychological actions having the primary purpose of influencing the opinions, emotions, attitudes, and behavior of hostile foreign groups, such as to support the achievement of national objectives. But in consolidation, they do the same thing to people in friendly rear areas. Who does that include us? So we have these predictions from the devil. And see, that's one of the main things about this whole thing, is that we have been taught to always deal in short-term thinking. They can say anything on Friday if you can't remember what they said on Monday. They can say anything this year if you have no process for retaining, storing, archiving, and remembering what they said last year. Because if we had this memory system and process, which is commonly called science, and think tanks, and research institutions, and scholars, if we had this memory system and process, we would have rejected HIV and AIDS back before the white homosexual males rejected it. They have pretty much rejected the thing. But they did so after a systematic process. By 1991, this was from Newsweek magazine, by 1991, well, it's just later than that already, right? What year is it? No, it isn't. It's 6,245. You brought the calendar to the planet. Why are you still quoting the Romans? I'm messing with you. But you know I'm telling the truth. You just had your New Year just 3 weeks ago. How many of us celebrated New Year, the new Kemetic calendar year? I did. 6,245. Go do your research. You invented the calendar. You don't need to let other people reset it for you. Because before you know it, the Republicans are going to reset it and say, damn it, it's a year zero all over again. By 1991, an estimated 5 million Americans may be carrying the AIDS virus. As the death toll rises, how will society cope with the health crisis? Washington Quarterly. World Health Organization estimates that 5 to 10 million people are infected with the virus worldwide in '89, a count that could reach as high as 100 million by 1991. You're going to be shocked when you see what the real number is. Or by 10 years after that, you're going to be really shocked when you see what the real number is. Some analysts argue that if 100 million or 2% of the world's population were infected, total deaths from AIDS in the 90s could be 50 million. The number infected then could double several more times after that and wipe out some countries in 10 to 20 years. The devil's predictions of doom. The Strecker Memorandum. How many of you know about Robert Strecker, the Strecker Memorandum? Okay, I'm glad no more people held up their hand in that, because I used to believe that cracker too. A large number of blacks have come to believe that HIV and AIDS are the result of genetic experiment in which U.S. scientists at, quote, Fort Detrick created the AIDS virus. How many of you heard that? All right, where at Fort Detrick? Where at Fort Detrick? Fort Detrick is a complex of 14 government agencies. You walk up to somebody and say, where you from? Where you from? Where you work? Oh, I worked at Detroit. You say, oh yeah, I'm from Detroit. Where you work at Detroit? Because you've never been to Detroit. I worked at Detroit. I'm from Detroit. Where did you work? Well, Fort Detrick is a complex. So everybody talking about they invented it at Fort Detrick. Where at Fort Detrick? USAM Red might be the best bet. United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. Pretty good. USAM Red is the name. Because if you have the name accurate, then you can look for the documents. But if you just say Fort Detrick, you're not going to find it. By combining two cancer-causing animal viruses, much as this can be attributed to a videotape widely circulated through our community entitled the Strecker Memorandum. Groups such as Nation of Islam, through its final call, have latched onto this hypothesis as a proven fact of such claims. In reality, what Robert Strecker presented was never proven to be true, despite the seemingly scientific manner in which he presented beliefs. And I said seemingly because, again, I'm from a scientific family. I love science. I love talking to science. I love listening to science. And I hate people who fake science. And I'm about to name some black folks who've been out here. One brother, I'm not going to name his name unless you ask me later.
Name him.
Okay, Dr. Jack Felder. He's been out here for years. He said, I used to work at Fort Detrick. I was a biological engineering, this and that. And I did this lecture in New York one time, and Jack's sitting in the front row looking scared like a deer caught in the headlights. Because I wanted to hear Jack. Everybody kept telling me, oh, Jack Felder's the man, Jack Felder's the man. So I said, okay, quick, somebody give me some Jack Felder. I finally found some cassettes, ordered them. They came in the mail. I ripped the package open and slammed it into the cassette player, hit the play button, and said, okay, Jack Felder, teach me. About 30 seconds, 60 seconds in, I said, wait a minute. This is not a scientist. Because scientists talk in a certain language that other scientists immediately recognize. You know, it's like somebody faking like they speak French. Oh, j'ai just come in from Paris. It's the most magnificent time. And you say to them, oh, okay, que magnifique. Where, speak French. I actually do speak French, but I'm not going there right now. But you ask them in French, where were you staying? And they say, oh, excuse me, but I don't understand what you're saying. It's because you're faking it! And we got people out here faking it. In reality, it was unproven. Among the many fantastic forecasts he made were by the mid-1990s there would be tens of millions of AIDS deaths in the U.S. True, yes or no? No. Hell no. Sometime during the 90s, Africa will be virtually wiped out by AIDS. I'm going to show you the statistics on Africa's population growth rates tomorrow. You're going to be surprised to find out, guess which continent has the highest fertility and highest population growth on the planet. When you're talking about countries being wiped out, you better be worried about Germany, Denmark, Russia, and some of these other European countries, Britain. If the spread of AIDS continues at the same rate, in 96 there could be 1 billion people infected. Sound almost like Oprah Winfrey. 5 years later, hypothetically 10 billion. However, the population of the world is only 5 billion. Could we be facing this threat of extinction during our lifetime? She said 96 and 5 years later, that's 2001. So everybody's dead now. We're all clones and robots. We're all clones and robots. You got some black folks out there talking about, yeah, Michael Jordan, he's a clone. People was telling me I was a clone. Man, I didn't know that. Do I have any superhuman powers? I saw some TV shows where the clones had superhuman powers. I want some of that. To set the record straight, in November 1996, the World Health Organization reported a cumulative total of 1,544 AIDS cases worldwide. Compared with UN statistics, AIDS Commissioner Crenshaw's forecast was off by a factor of 640 times higher. Now, if you come to my store and you buy some groceries, I calculate your bill, and it's 647 times too high, are you going to come back to that store again? Why do we keep coming back to these people? The same one who said they was all going to be dying is now talking about the down low syndrome. Oh, we're going to bust them out in a second on that down low. Her model was based upon the belief that HIV was an infectious agent which was being spread through sex, a true STD. Yet as all evidence confirms, HIV has never demonstrated the etiology of an STD. It is not a sexually transmitted disease. See, people say, you got no memory, I can tell you anything. They say, well, how many people are currently infected with HIV in the United States? For every year, they used to always say, oh, about 1 million. They said that the first year. How many? About 1 million. They would say it again this year. I saw it just recently. How many infected? Oh, about 1 million. And it's spreading? Oh, yeah, it's spreading rapidly. Well, I actually collected the data from the CDC from 1987. Their first figures they put out, they said approximately 1.5 million. There was a plus or minus there. The next time they came out, by 1988, they said it was 1.25 million. Then in 1988 to 95, they lowered it down to about 1 million. Then they lowered it in 1996 to 763,000. Then they lowered it in 1998 to 465,000. Excuse me, there's your epidemic. Show me another epidemic that begins with high numbers and spreads to increasingly lower numbers. And then they come up with all kind of stuff. They say, well, here's the chart, CDC study of data from 25 states on, this is AIDS in the United States, taken on the face of an ethnic-specific disease. Why? Why? And they show these charts. And white people, oh, it's declining. And black people, oh, it's rising. And then Latinos, well, they're just kind of holding steady till we really need them. Till we see them really taking over too many neighborhoods, then we'll tell them they're all dying of AIDS. And they're running that game on them right now. But there was a number of reasons. Number one, HIV surveillance projects are carried out within housing projects. Number two, data collection is being done in government-sponsored health clinics. Number three, the disproportionate use of free family planning services, free birth control devices by blacks, Hispanics, and poverty-poor whites. See, you got to watch that word free. Europeans know us very well to know that they can get us by putting that word free. Free clinics, free HIV testing, free diabetes testing, free government cheese, a free boat trip from West Africa. Free. Yeah, we know about that word free. Number four, during this is real critical here. During post-HIV test counseling, you are told whether your HIV positive test was a true positive or a false positive. That's where you really get the HIV infection. It's not in the test or not in the acts or whatever. You really get the HIV infection in the post-test counseling session. Now, somebody was telling me about some buck wild stuff going on here where 400 people were ignorant enough to submit themselves to a phony HIV test, and then they put out on the radio, y'all need to come back. And some of them people are going to be so dumb, they're going to come back. They're going to come right back. No, we're not going to leave our people like that. So we're here now. We're going to interrupt the process. We have to. But there's a number of other reasons why we see this targeting. And then we got these headlines. And excuse me, this isn't any clearer than it is. Let me see if I can get this just a little bit bigger up here. Okay, that's a little better. This I'm getting just some headlines on this. Tomorrow we'll have the computer configured the right way. New York Post. This is July 12, 2004. HIV alarm for mid-aged blacks. The middle-aged black man is emerging as HIV's newest face, especially in Manhattan. More and more black men between the ages of 40 and 54 are testing positive for HIV. Now, guess what? That's that same cracker I was on the radio with last week, Dr. Stephen Carpiat. I recognize these people's footprints, and especially when they said Manhattan, he's the one in Manhattan getting the blacks to do this. And that's really a problem when our research scientists and our defense and intelligence officials identify your enemy, identify what they're doing, identify where they're at, show you the footprints of their work, and we still can't do anything about that. Does anybody see a problem with that? Does it seem like we need to take care of some business here? So, more and more black men, of the 75,000 plus city residents living with the HIV virus, which causes AIDS, see how they stick that in there, which causes AIDS, because there's so many scientists now saying, you never proved anything. Now many are saying, show me the isolation papers. HIV was never isolated. Wow. The man who discovered it, what's his name?
Gallo.
Dr. Luc Montagnier. Gallo stole the discovery.
Oh, right.
3 congressional hearings called Gallo stuff. Fraud, cover-up, government. Right. Gallo stole it. Luc Montagnier discovered, not it, he discovered a process called reverse transcriptase in lymph glands of some of these people suffering from GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency. And he said, with this evidence of reverse transcriptase means that these men have a retrovirus. That's all he discovered was some enzymatic action. That's far from discovering a killer germ. So these figures were released with the 15th International AIDS Conference in Thailand's capital. I want you to remember this because this comes from the New York Post, July 12, 2004. Okay, I think I have a second document. I might have to look that up. But the second document, yeah, I do have it in there. It's from Africa. I want you to remember that document from the New York Post, July 2004. I'm going to show you the same newspaper contradicting themselves within just a couple of months of themselves. You can't have it both ways. Don't crisscross. You've tested positive for antibodies. You're going to die of the disease. We're going to give your child vaccination screen antibodies so they'll be protected from the disease. The crisscross. You can't get away with that with somebody who knows what's going on. You can only say those things to people who are ignorant. Now, how can we pyramid builders be so ignorant right now that the only heterosexuals on this planet in danger from AIDS are black folks?
Right.
Including black folks in the United States where there is no white heterosexual AIDS epidemic. It doesn't exist.
Right.
Newshawn Williams. How many people in the room recognize his name? Newshawn Williams. Newshawn Williams, remember him?
Yeah.
Rochester, New York.
Yeah, I remember.
Black man, diagnosed as HIV positive. Health officials promote 10 women and suspected of infecting 90 others in 6 months. I guess he didn't need a home. Now, the thing you got to understand is this. There are these things called the HIV transmission risk assessments. Most people have been taught that you can get HIV. How many people have ever heard that you can get HIV infection from one act of unprotected sex? If you've ever heard that, raise your hand. How many of you believe it? Raise your hand if you believe it or have believed it. You can get HIV infection from one act of unprotected sex, they say. Well, that's what they say, but they've actually been covering it up. I'm going to show you the documents here. I got them up here. But in actuality, according to Nancy Keidi, who was the only one who's ever really conducted these studies, it would take an average, if you have a couple, a man and a woman, he is definitely diagnosed HIV positive, and she is HIV negative. If they have sex with each other, unprotected sex, it takes an average of 1,000 acts of unprotected sex before she will turn up HIV positive. Now, if you have a couple, man and a woman, she is HIV positive and he is HIV negative. If they have sex, unprotected sex together, it takes an average of 9,000 acts of unprotected sex before she gives him HIV. Now, I'm married. I've been married for 15, 16 years. And I'm not going to talk about how frequently, but when you've been married for a while, it's like, you know, it's just more of a mental thing. But I'm going to talk about y'all. And I know, if we were to be realistic, all this bravado aside, young brothers, you know how we are. Yeah, I'm the man. Yeah, right. You're the man. That's why you're sitting up late at night with that computer on. But if a couple, a married couple in this country might have sex 3 to 5 times a month. So 1,000 acts of sex at 5 times a month. Let's say they're frivolous. They're frolicking. Let's say they do it, what? 5 times a month or 10 times a month? Which should we give them? I'm not talking about you and me. We're talking about the cousins. We're going to give them 10. We're going to be real generous. Now, if you're married, brothers, you know that's real generous, right? Okay, let's say they do it 10 times a month. How long does it take that couple to engage in 1,000 acts of sex? 10 times a month.
100 months. 100 months. Right. 100 months.
5, 4,
100 months.
2, 1. I was about to give away a CD to somebody. Because head math is real powerful. 8.5 years. He's HIV positive. She's HIV negative. 8.5 years they have sex. That's 10 times a month. That's once every 3 days. Ooh, that was real generous too. Especially when she works and you work too. Oh, don't even start that. Okay, now if he's HIV positive and she's HIV negative, how long will it take for him to give, if she's HIV positive and he's HIV negative, how long will it take for her to give it to him? How many years? 72, 76 years. Yeah, and guess what? It takes 1,000 acts with someone who, in the discordant couple studies, that's what these are. You can look up discordant couple HIV transmission. But in gonorrhea, it takes 3 acts of sex to transmit gonorrhea. And you know, you can do that in one night. You try to do it in one night. But anyways, Nushawn Williams. So according to those numbers, according to the mathematical, for Nushawn to infect those 10 women and suspect of affecting 90 others in the course of 6 months, he would have had to have engaged in sex 1,090 times in 6 months. Now, let's say he slept 8 hours a day. He had to sleep, eat. We had to sleep. That leaves him 16 hours a day to get his freak on. I calculated the numbers. Nushawn Williams had sex about once every 17 minutes for 6 months. Now, rumor was he was taking herbal Viagra. But in actuality, from reappraising AIDS, they looked closely at this case, and this man's still in jail behind this. Any lawyer, any doctor could have got him off if they would have just break the wall, break the code. Health officials promote homeless, bisexual, New York dope injector, and 10 female sexual partners as heterosexual HIV cases. Drug injecting and anal intercourse, not vaginal intercourse, are implicated. There's a 1 in 10 trillion chance that vaginal sex is the only vector when HIV man has 100 female partners and 10 become HIV infected. A 1 in 10 trillion chance. You got a better chance of winning the Super Lotto every week for like 5 or 10 weeks. You got a better chance of winning the Super Lotto every week for 5 or 10 weeks than that. You calculate the odds. 1 in 10 trillion. That's a lot. You know what I'm saying? Now, I know some of you done won the Super Lotto 5 or 10 weeks in a row, right? Nushawn Williams is the only one who won it. Voices of dissent. You know, all along there have been people who bitterly complained about this thing. Voices of dissent. Peter Duesberg, retrovirologist and member of the prestigious National Academy of Sciences. He said, quote, HIV is just a latent and perfectly harmless retrovirus that most, but not all, HIV patients happen to carry. And you know, Duesberg is considered to be the world's foremost scientist on this subject. He says, to say that HIV is the cause of AIDS is to cast aside everything we know about retroviruses. The HIV theory is inconsistent, is paradoxical, and it is absurd. Walter Gilbert, Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1980, professor of molecular biology at Harvard, says of Peter Duesberg, he is absolutely correct in saying that no one has proven that AIDS is caused by the AIDS virus, and it may be absolutely correct that the virus cultured in the laboratory may not be the cause of AIDS. I would not be surprised if there were another cause and that HIV is not even involved. Dr. Albert Sabin, discoverer of live virus polio vaccine. I'm no big fan of his, but he's a scientist. He said the basis of present action and education is that everybody who tests positive for the virus must be regarded as a transmitter, and there is no evidence for that. Up to the present time, all that beautiful knowledge about the molecular biology of the virus isn't helping us at all to deal with it. Charles Thomas, professor of biochemistry at Harvard, said it is widely believed by the general public that a group of diseases, that's the other thing, you got to realize, we're not talking about a single element here, we're talking about a group of diseases called HIV, called AIDS. That HIV causes a group of diseases called AIDS. Many biomedical scientists now question this hypothesis. We propose a thorough reappraisal of the existing evidence for and against that argument be conducted. And it goes on and on. Carrie Mullis won a Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1993, says it's not even probable, let alone scientifically proven, that HIV causes AIDS. If there is evidence that HIV causes AIDS, there should be scientific documents which either singularly or collectively demonstrate that fact, at least with a high probability. There are no such documents. I've been looking for them. Everybody's been looking for them. That's why on Stephen Karpiak, when I had him on the radio last week, and I asked him, can you please submit to us the name and the publication date of that document that proved that HIV exists? Can you do that? You know what he said? Oh, I'm not talking. This is just a bunch of load of crap. Oh, this is this and that. All you have to do is just name the document. If the document exists and you know it exists, name it. If the document exists and you don't know it exists, have the heart to say, you know something? I can't name that document. There are no such documents. Human beings are full of retroviruses. We don't know if it's hundreds of thousands or hundreds of thousands. We've only recently started to look for them, but they've never killed anybody before. People have been living with retroviruses for millions of years. In the bodies of us healthy people in this room right now, there are hundreds of thousands of retroviruses. Duesberg defends challenges to the existence of HIV. Article 1 of 2 for Continuum. Now, I'm going to have to get to the bottom of this. Let me see this. I can just move this up here a little bit, and this will give me a minute. Article 1 of 2 for Continuum, Volume 4, pages 8 and 9. In 1993, Montagnier et al. Have isolated a retrovirus, now termed human immunodeficiency virus, from a patient with lymphadenopathy and proposed that HIV may cause AIDS. Antibodies against this virus have since been found in many, but not all, AIDS patients, Duesberg 93, and in 17 million healthy people. Eileen Papadopoulos, Val Turner, John Papadimitriou, David Kauser et al. Maintain that the very existence of HIV is dubious because, one, HIV has not been properly isolated and thus could not have been properly identified. According to Papadopoulos et al., HIV has never been isolated as an independent particle separate from anything else. So you have to understand the nature of retroviruses. They can't exist on their own. They have to be in their own self. So how can you say it's isolated if it has to be in something else? And without isolation, everything else falls apart, especially the test. It says, true, because antibodies against HIV are not specific, if it exists in something else, then antibodies to it are going to also include proteins from the something else it exists in, which is why the tests cross-react to such a broad spectrum of different things. So antibodies are not specific. They submit that the following evidence is not specific for HIV. HIV identifying in the growth medium of infected human cell cultures either the existence of virus-like particles with the electron microscope or reverse transcriptase associated with such particles or certain HIV antigens or proteins associated with particles. Again, the contaminant. because each of these would be cellular materials or could be from cell-borne endogenous retroviruses other than HIV. Indeed, each of these criteria could reflect another retrovirus, and some of these criteria, e.g. particles and proteins, could reflect non-viral material altogether. Dr. Laila Africa said it about as clearly as anybody. He said HIV is nothing more than pieces of a dead, broken up cell. It can't think, act, jump, react, or do anything else. Simple strands of DNA covered by a double lipid protein sheath is the technical definition of a virus. It's not living. How do you kill something that's never lived? Viruses are nothing more than cellular debris. The three main lies. I like the way Elliot Fox puts this. AIDS, the Waterloo of the medical industrial complex, said to be caused by a virus, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Detected by antibody tests which are proven to be grossly inaccurate, and treated by incredibly toxic pharmaceuticals that are definitely proven to cause the syndrome. Whoa. That's it in a nutshell. So it goes on, is it contagious? We used to think that everyone is at equal risk for HIV and AIDS and that a heterosexual epidemic was inevitable. But the epidemiology of AIDS has yet to prove consistent with that view, unless you only look at black people. But others have looked at black people closely, scientifically, and they come back and refute that belief that black people are suffering from heterosexual HIV. Eleanor Burkitt, author of The Greatest Show on Earth, a pretty decent, usable book. HIV has not spread it anywhere near the rate that would be expected of a newly introduced STD. It is dawdling. In fact, HIV tests of military recruits and blood donors suggest that HIV infections were no more common among the general population in 1992 than they were in 1985. Why isn't HIV following well-established epidemiological patterns? No one has provided an answer. Well, actually, a lot of people have provided an answer. I'm just going to give you one more of these. I've got so much of these, and much of these appear in my book, AIDS Exposed. C.C. Fry, author of The Great AIDS Hoax, said AIDS is neither new nor unique, but was concocted as an umbrella term to cover a complex of diseases, some of which have been medically described as far back as 1539. See, none of the AIDS diseases are new. I'm going to give you one more trivial question. First person to get this answer right. How many, according to the CDC's definition of AIDS, how many different diseases compose AIDS in the United States? Yes. How many different diseases? Next, one. She says 30. Anybody else? 15? 45. 45? 7. It's 29. With 30 you win. Because some people say 30, but it's actually technically 29, but you know, they be switching stuff around. So you see me mention I'm the one who got that question right.
What are the 29? What are the 29?
It's a whole spectrum of them. I mentioned them in the book. It includes 12 different types of bacteriological infections, things like cervical cancer. There are a total of 5 different types of cancer, including Kaposi sarcoma, lymphadenopathy, which is actually caused by the AIDS chemotherapies. Right. Cervical cancer. I mean, what does cervical cancer have to do with crazy? Oh, not crazy, excuse me, HIV-related dementia. Yeah, you crazy. If you crazy, you crazy. If you crazy, take an HIV antibody test and test HIV negative, what are you? Crazy. If you take the antibody test and take HIV positive, what are you? You're full-blown AIDS. Your friends thought you was crazy. I say you're crazy for taking that test. But the test, if you test positive on the test, your crazy is now blamed on HIV. It caused the cervical cancer in her, but it made him crazy. And some diseases that are so common, once you test HIV positive, your yeast infection is no longer a yeast infection. It's candidiasis. Wow. T.C. Fry's shocking findings. I think this is a real good piece here. T.C. Fry, who wrote a book called The Great AIDS Hoax, he's going on to transition to eternity now. And we're real grateful that he was so far ahead of everybody. But he talked about these AIDS. AIDS is not new. They just put the A on IDS. IDS has been around for decades. They put an A on it. It's aggravating. aggregate disease has been around for decades. Combined immunodeficiency disease, combined immunodeficiency syndrome, AIDS, immunodeficiency syndrome, severe combined immunodeficiency syndrome. These things have been around for a long time. Okay, just a couple more, and then I'm going to move forward to some brand new stuff. Dr. Wilbert, great, these are all good. Let me just take them real quickly. Dr. Rachel Bagley, she's not necessarily an AIDS dissenter, but what she said makes sense anyway. She said, no one in Zambia ever dies of AIDS. They will say it is malaria or fever or TB. Now, they will say it's malaria, fever, TB that would kill the person, but what does the West say? AIDS. Fela Kuti died of heart disease, heart failure. What did the West say? AIDS. Why? Because he had 27 wives, and the white man just cannot hang with the fact that a black man can to support 27 wives and have children. And that all 27 of them would be glad to be his wives. White man can't handle that, so he has to die of AIDS in the white man's modality. You see what I'm saying? None of his wives died. Magic Johnson, what year did he die? He died in what, 93? Oh, he's a clone, that's right. Because his clone bred his wife twice, got 2 healthy little boys. Just big and strong and healthy and buying up half of L.A. I didn't say that. It slipped out. Dr. Charles Geschecter, professor of history, a 1990 report in the Journal of Infectious Diseases, a peer-reviewed medical magazine, concluded that HIV tests were useless in Central Africa, where the microbes responsible for tuberculosis, malaria, and leprosy were so prevalent that they registered over 70% false positives in people whose immune systems are compromised by a wide variety of sources other than HIV. The myth of heterosexual AIDS. Nobody wants to look at the facts about this. It's the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen, and that's not heterosexual. I've sent countless letters to medical journals pointing out epidemiological discrepancies, and they simply ignore them. The fact is, this whole heterosexual AIDS thing is a hoax. Dr. Gordon Stewart, Emeritus Professor of Health in Glasgow, England. But what about AIDS in Africa? You know, and how often do they put that face on the face of Africa? All the time. How come it's so hard to get white folks out of there then? They want our children to grow up thinking that this is what their fate is if they were in Africa. And how many of them cousins of yours have ever said, oh, I'm so glad I ain't no African? You rub your eyes and say, well, dang, what are you, a piece of cheese? Well, the white homosexuals in South Africa did have an AIDS epidemic because they were trying to do the same thing the white homosexuals in the United States were doing. Buck wilding with the poppers and the cocaine and injection drug using, and every STD you could ever imagine, homosexuals go through them all, every year. All spectrum of antibiotics and all this other kind of stuff. When you look at their behaviors real specifically, you find out they's buck wild. Everybody been telling you that Africa's just overwhelmed by AIDS. Haven't they said that a lot? Yeah. Well, let's bust them up. From the beginning of the AIDS era, there has persisted widespread propaganda that African women and children were being wiped out by an uncontrollable AIDS epidemic. The perception has persisted despite mounds of credible evidence to the contrary, research to the contrary. Through official pronouncements by such credible institutions as the UN World Health Organization, we might come to believe that AIDS is wiping out Africa. Yet this notion is unsupported by credible facts. For example, the journal AIDS Care, Volume 9, number 497, page 493. See, give your references so other people can go and verify it. Published figures on total AIDS cases reported to WHO as of November 9, 2996. According to that report, the worldwide cumulative total, meaning all that ever were added together, of 1,544,067 cases reported to the agency, only 553,291 originated from the 53 countries of Africa. In contrast, America, whose population was 1/3 of Africa's, had reported 565,000 cases. 54 countries 53, 54 countries had less than America. Nigeria, with a population believed to be half of that of the United States, Nigeria, are you ready? Had a mere 5,509 reported cases, less than 1% of AIDS cases in the U.S. U.S. has more AIDS than Africa. We graphed them out. This is America. We have the population right here by 1,000. That's the population of America. There's a population of Africa. Here's the number of AIDS cases in America, the number of AIDS cases in Africa. Let's compare U.S. and Nigeria. Population. U.S. 263 million as of 96. Nigeria estimated 130 million. AIDS cases, 565,000 in the United States. In Nigeria, 5,509. Compare U.S. and Zimbabwe. In the early days, remember when they said Haitians were all dying of AIDS? Yeah. They all died off, didn't they? Right. Or does Haiti have the third highest fertility rate in the Western Hemisphere? Then they said Uganda. They said up to as many as 25% of Uganda's population was HIV infected. Right. Now they say 6%. Well, what happened? The people didn't die off because Uganda has one of the highest population growth rates every year on the planet. What, did they all immigrate to the United States? How could it go from 26% of the population down to 6% when the people didn't die off? They didn't take the chemotherapy. Maybe they cleaned up the water, put in sanitary facilities, and put in hospitals, because Uganda had been suffering from the after effects of devastating war after Idi Amin. U.S. and Zimbabwe. HIV prevalence estimates in the United States. They say that 0.3% of the U.S. population was HIV infected, while they said 10% of Zimbabwe. But if we look at full-blown AIDS cases, it's 55% of this percentage in America, 55% of them were full-blown AIDS. And in Zimbabwe, of the 10% they said were HIV infected, only 5.7% of them were full-blown AIDS. So it looks like if you're HIV diagnosed in America, you better move to Zimbabwe as fast as you can and live. That's exactly what's there. Compare conversion rates, comparing HIV positive to full-blown rates. 0.38% in the U.S., 6% in Mozambique. In the United States, 55% of that 0.38 are full-blown AIDS, and in Mozambique, only 1.86% in 1996. And Mozambique is not necessarily a country that's doing really, really well. I'm just going to skip through from this. You know, some of the studies that they've done of prostitutes show that prostitutes are not getting HIV and AIDS. It's the same in this country, the same in Kenya. That's what that study talks about. The prostitutes, they're studying them. They're trying to figure out why the prostitutes weren't getting HIV. They weren't using robbers. They were saying the men were getting it from them, but they weren't getting it. They used to say, they've said so many things. That's the thing. We just haven't been paying attention to what they say. They said in the United States, because of the epidemiology of HIV and AIDS, that the male, let's see, what's the word? The two men are engaged in their activities, right? One is called receptive, and the other one is called, the inside is the one called the bottom and one called the top, right? They say that the receptive man's anus was not capable of transmitting the virus to the top, the penetrative man. But they were saying in Africa, the prostitutes were spreading it through anal intercourse. So that the black woman's behind could do what the white man's behind couldn't do. No matter how much he practices and tries new and creative things with it. I'm going to give you just this article. This is a real good one here. And I've got a bunch of new stuff we're going to get to. What do African doctors say? AIDS in Africa, misinformation and disinformation for the world's major medical journals, The Lancet. From Dr. Felix I.D. Konate-Hulo, a man trained in Europe and trained in Africa, a world-renowned scientist. He said, before the days of AIDS in Ghana, there was a death a day more in the rainy and harmattan seasons on my ward alone of 34 beds. He had an intensive care ward. They died from one or the other of the following. Cerebrovascular accident from malignant hypertension. What's that commonly called? Hepatoma, ruptured amoebic abscess, hematomasis, blood poisoning. chronic renal failure, sickle cell crisis, septicemia, perforated typhoid gut, hepatic coma, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, fancy ways of saying heart disease and stuff. Endomyocardial fibrosis related pericardial effusion. All right, so, right? But he says, today, because of AIDS, it seems that Africans are not allowed to die from these conditions any longer. If tens of thousands are dying from AIDS and Africans do not cremate their dead, where are the graves? Where are all these dead people? Where are they? Everybody's been looking for them. White guy, Rowan Milan, who hated Thabo Mbeki. Brilliant Thabo Mbeki, perhaps the most highly intelligent, highest IQ president of any major country on the planet, is a black man named Thabo Mbeki. And he was bold enough to challenge these people too. I got in trouble with the CIA for backing him up and delivering a speech at UN Plaza called Hands Off Thabo Mbeki. CIA was all over me that weekend. It was actually kind of fun. Africa, AIDS in Africa, since at last. Okay, we're going to make a little bit of sense of this, but there's a question mark. I put the question mark out. Now this is written by Stuart Derbyshire in Spike.com, February 2003. Now this one has some truth in it and also has some deception in it. It's not often that a research, let me do this one second. It's not often that research report packs the kind of punch recently provided by the independent consultant David Gisselquist and his colleagues. 1. Gisselquist's devastatingly simple investigation associates the bulk of HIV prevalence in Africa with healthcare exposure, dirty needles used within clinics and hospitals, rather than with heterosexual activity. Gisselquist and his colleagues did not have to do any primary research to reach this conclusion. They simply used the research reports available through 88 that reported risk factors associated with HIV infection, including sexual behavior, socio-economic variables, prostitution, presence of other sexually transmitted diseases, and health care utilization. Between 84 and 88, individuals with STTs, but without a history of medical injection, for example, were experiencing lower rates of HIV infection than individuals with STDs receiving injection. While such association does not prove causation, it certainly cause for concern. More startlingly, however, is that children whose mothers were HIV negative were reported turning up HIV positive in surprisingly high numbers. The children were HIV negative, the mothers were HIV negative, but the babies were turning up HIV positive. In one study, 39% of children between age 1 and 24 months were found to be HIV positive. Now, anybody who really knows the HIV test knows why that would happen. Because the children are carrying some antibodies from their mother, and every pregnant woman carries HLA antibodies. And these show up as HIV positive on the test. That's why the testing of pregnant women should be against the law, but that's how it's done in Africa. They only test the pregnant women, and then they say, well, these pregnant women are X% of the population, so that's what everybody else has. Okay, let me just pick it up where it began, work it off. In one study, 39% of children aged between 1 and 24 months were found to be HIV positive despite having an HIV negative mother. And another study found 24% of children between age 1 and 48 months were HIV positive with HIV negative mothers. Well, let me show you. Well, I know how it happened, but let me show you what they write. Because what they writing is something you've heard before. In both studies, HIV-positive children had a higher frequency of injections than HIV-negative children born about the same time. The obvious conclusion is that injection was the source of infection, as was avoided by suggesting that the mothers were incorrectly diagnosed or that the children were victims of sexual abuse. How many of you ever heard the scandalous rumor that the Africans have a mysterious belief that sex with a baby or the virgin will cure AIDS? How many of you ever heard that lie? Almost cut us.
I heard it.
They invented that myth to try and explain the fact that the children after vaccination were showing up as HIV positive. The vaccines cause positive reaction on these tests. It's true in the United States, it's true in Africa. The obvious conclusion that the injection was the source of infection. He calls it infection, but he really should be calling it positive test reaction. It is surprising that scientists with even a modicum of training would rule out the likely in favor of reaching for the improbable. But then perhaps the scientists involved thought it was more likely Africans were having sex with their own children than getting infected from another source. Now this is a white doctor. Now, I'm no big fan of Gisselquist, but again, sometimes we use them to beat each other up, to show how they contradict. Because one of the things, Gisselquist is still believing in the infection. I don't believe in the infection. This one from a very significant doctor, Muhammad Ali Al-Bayati, president, toxicologist, and pathologist from Toxic Health. He writes, I reviewed many published studies that describe the impact of malnutrition on the functions and the structure of the immune system of people of Africa. Malnutrition! These studies clearly demonstrate that the main cause of AIDS in Africa is severe starvation and not HIV. I describe these studies in my book, Get All the Facts. HIV does not cause AIDS. The functions of the immune system, especially the cellular immunity, are impaired in malnourished individuals. Show me a junkie with a healthy immune system. Junkies are malnourished. For example, the size of the thymus of 42 malnourished children was reduced by 90% as compared with a case-matched normal control. In a second study involving 110 malnourished children, the thymic area was found to be 20% of the size in the healthy children. Thymus is part of your immune system. High prevalence of malnutrition in Africa and other developing countries has been documented by Fauci et al. They stated that the magnitude of malnutrition problems worldwide is immense, protein, etc., etc. So, in other words, he goes on and he's talking about the effects of malnutrition and how this was a better way of describing what was happening. And it continues from Stuart Derbyshire. First, it was in the interest of AIDS researchers in developed countries where HIV seems stubbornly confined to homosexual males, intravenous drug users, and their partners, to present AIDS in Africa as a heterosexual epidemic. Second, there may have been an inclination to emphasize sexual transmission as an argument for condom promotion, coinciding with pre-existing programs, population control, and efforts to curb Africa's what?
Rapid population growth.
Condoms, AIDS, population, you see it. And I haven't even started talking about that latex condom. And if you hear or read my book, Busted the Latex Condom, any man who ever put the latex condom in a woman again, he should be taken out and whipped. A latex condom, I call it the killer condom. And just the women with the highest rate of condom usage are also the women with the highest rate of HIV antibody reactivity. It's true in the United States. Who has the highest rate of condom usage, latex condom usage in the U.S.? Of all women. Black women. The same true in France. The same true in Europe. French women have a higher rate of condom usage than the women of other Scandinavian countries. And guess what? The French women have the highest HIV positive diagnosis. It's because of what is in the condom. 6 contaminants. That's why they give away. Free, free, free! Every time you get together, condom merchants jumping out the bush. Free, free. Have you had your condom mercenaries, I should call them. Or missionaries.
Yeah.
Get your condom and a Bible, you'll be free forever. Third, the role of sexual promiscuity in the spread of AIDS in Africa appears to have evolved in part out of prior assumptions about the sexuality of Africans. You know, there have been some horrible assumptions about African sexual behavior. You know that's true? Let me ask you these questions. Who, on average, has is younger in age at first sexual intercourse? The African female or the American female?
American.
Who has the higher number of sexual partners per lifetime, the African female or the American female?
American.
Who engages in sex more frequently, African females or American females?
African.
Then how come the more frequently you said African? No. No. That's true in America too. You know, let the truth be known. You got some sisters, come on sisters, confess. You know you got sisters out here who ain't getting it but maybe once every 3 years. Or maybe 3 times a year. You know that's true. And some of these sisters are getting it once or twice every year or two. And then they get talked into taking an HIV antibody test when the preacher talks them into it. Because the preacher's getting money. The preacher's getting paid. These churches are opening up HIV hospices and stuff, right? They're buying these apartment buildings, they're putting HIV patients and getting grants from the government, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, we've got to move real fast. Oh, talking on microphone. Okay, sorry, I got a big voice. You know, they're getting paid. You have to keep the beds full before you get paid. You have to keep the beds full before you get paid. How do you keep the beds full? Tell them to get down there and get tested. Let's move forward. And fourth, health professionals in World Health Organization and elsewhere worried that public discussion of HIV risks during healthcare might lead people to avoid immunizations. Public discussion of HIV risks during healthcare might lead people to avoid immunizations. What are they saying? They're saying that the immunization rate is linked to HIV reactivity, HIV antibody testing. The more that you lead your children to get vaccinated, the more likely that you're going to be creating this problem again and again. Not all of us do that. How many people in this room would never, let's say, because some of us didn't know, would never allow our children to be injected with any vaccines? Raise your hand. And how many people in this room would allow their children to be vaccinated? Raise your hand. All right, and everybody else don't have children.
You mean now or when we did it, when we didn't know?
Now.
Okay, no, now I wouldn't.
Okay. Because a lot of us, I can't make any judgment for you. All I can say is before you vaccinate, you better investigate. I cannot make that decision for you. And you or nobody else can make that decision for me. Somebody had a question or comment?
Yeah, comment. They don't let a kid in school in this town.
They won't let your children in school. My children been in school every year. Every year they call me in. Well, sir, if your daughters don't have their vaccination records by September, every year I do the same thing. I write my letter. I read the law, write my letter, take it to them. And I like to look at that expression on their face when they read the letter and they say, okay, your child's exempt.
Yes, you can do that.
Before you do it, you've got to investigate. The only way you make that statement is you haven't done your investigation. Right. When you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer. It's true. Now, we do have a book over here called Vaccinations, an Ounce of Prevention or a Pound of Death, which talks about the legal exemptions. You don't have to do what you don't want to do. You just got to stop allowing these people to bamboozle you, to railroad you. And, you know, I appreciate the question because it's a critically necessary question and it's always asked. So we're not criticizing you personally. But now you know you got some work to do. You need to get into your state health and safety codes and just go on the internet and look for 2 words, vaccine exemptions. And type in your state and get them. Get them and use them. You know, 26% of pediatricians don't inject their own children with all of the vaccines. Right. They'll do some of them, but not all of them. So let's go forward. Oh, there's just so much in this. AIDS in Africa, cause we did that one. STDs, are they on the rise or the decline? Most people believe that STDs in this country are on the decline. This is gonorrhea, and the syphilis chart looks almost the same. Since 1980, I think that's 85 here. Gonorrhea, is it spreading? Look at that chart. It's going towards 0. Syphilis chart is almost the same, except for in 1991, the syphilis chart went up and went right back down. 1991. What happened in 1991? George Bush invasion of Iraq. And they did a whole lot of government testing and stuff. Brother, comment?
Yeah, Brother Keith, did you talk about the bathhouse they had in the early 80s in San Francisco?
Yeah, we'll talk about that in the latter part of here.
Okay.
Because that whole bathhouse scene, men went buck wild.
Crazy.
They went crazy. Yeah. And it wasn't just having intimate sexual contact and exchange of body fluid with 10 to 90 people a week. But it was the drugs they were taking, the prophylactic use of antibiotics that would get stronger and stronger, the severe number of infections that they were having. It was buck wild and malnutrition and everything. They were just buck wild. Okay, according to this first chart, gonorrhea would seem to be clearly on decline among the general population. The trend for syphilis is nearly identical. The second chart was obtained from 1996 STD data by the CDC, and it clearly shows that the epidemic of chlamydia in the U.S. commenced with the Safe Sex campaign in 1984. Chlamydia is at virtually 0. You see it? Now, how can you have the other STDs doing like this while this brand new one goes the other way? And one of the things I discovered when I found out about that chlamydia is that the thing was being operated, the whole chlamydia thing was being operated out of Baltimore. They were using a high school clinics for a special program.
But doesn't chlamydia mimic something else?
Condoms. My book, Busted, is the first resource that apparently ever existed that confirms, to me beyond question, but I have to put my research up to be challenged by anybody. But my book, Busted, the Latex Condom Conspiracy, shows the link between the onset of the safe-sex campaign and the latex condom and the direct connection to chlamydia and the fallopian tube blockage. They're blaming on a chlamydia infection the woman never knew she had is actually should be blamed on the use of latex condoms. Condoms equal chlamydia, if you ask me, and all my citations are in the book. You can take them into the library and look at the data for yourself. Yeah. And I've been given great compliments from other researchers that said, excuse me, brother, for all the stuff you do, that book you did on condoms is apparently the reference that everybody else is using. What about STDs in gays? Gonorrhea rate in gays stirs AIDS concerns. Despite a decades-long decline, the incidence of gonorrhea among gay males has begun to rise sharply. It's declining in everybody else, including black women. But gonorrhea is exploding in them while their HIV rates are going down. How are you going to have it both ways? One STD is climbing while the other's dropping until you go to black people, then the same one that was climbing in them was dropping, and the one that was dropping is climbing. You cannot have it both ways. It's because it is statistical manipulation.
That's right.
Are HIV tests good scientists? Good science? No. You just skip that. Well, no, I'm going to skip it. Western blot. This is the confirmatory test they use for ELISA. It's currently accepted that a positive Western blot antibody test is synonymous with HIV infection and the attendant risk of developing and dying from AIDS. This is from the Eliopoulos et al. They are called the Perth group from Australia. Great group of scientists. They've been busting this whole AIDS thing really quite amazingly. And they're writing in a major medical magazine. In this communication, we present a critical evaluation of the presently available data on HIV isolation and antibody testing. Remember, this is the same group that later says HIV has never been isolated. The available evidence suggests that 1, the antibody tests are not standardized. 2, the antibody tests are not reproducible. 3, the Western blot protein bands that are considered to be coded by the HIV genome and to be specific to HIV may not be coded by the HIV genome and may in fact represent normal cellular proteins. Even if the proteins are specific to HIV, because no gold standard has been used and may not even exist to determine specificity, a positive Western blot may mean nothing more than cross-reactivity with the many non-HIV antibodies present in HIV patients. So they concluded the tests need to be thrown away. And then I go through this whole long thing, breaking down the test. I'm not going to go through this. I've done this a number of times, and it is somewhat mathematical, and we'll get hung up. Just in brief, you have to know how to evaluate the test for accuracy. When they talk about the test, they will never use the term accuracy to say this test is 99.8% accurate. They're not allowed to use the word accurate. They use the word specific. And that is a very clever use of language to hide and cover up the huge number of false positives. If they tell you the test is 99.8% specific for ELISA, that means it's 0.2% non-specific. That 0.2% non-specificity becomes your margin for error. Now, if you give that test to a huge number of low-risk people, where prevalence might be 0.003%, but your margin for error is 2%, then a huge number of people are going to fall through that margin for error. And I'm going to show you that. And so we do this calculation. It's called positive predictive value. you have to know certain things. And I'm not really going to go through this. We can, if you need, you can get it in the book. We can go through it in more detail. But these tests, let me just go through this one. I think this will give us. According to CDC statistics, there in 1998 presumed to be an estimated 400,000 to 650,000 HIV positive in the U.S., an average of 525,000 using this middle figure imposed on a total U.S. population of 269 million. We extract that there are an estimated 195 HIV positive individuals per 100,000 population in the U.S., a prevalence of 0.00195 or 0.195% of the population. This figure for prevalence includes high and low risk. Compared to earlier predictions, this is a very low trend. So, you're going to calculate this thing called the positive predictive value of the test. This tells you the value, the worthy or worthlessness of the test for detecting antibodies. For one, to determine the positive predictive value of a particular test, we must identify the non-specificity or margin for error of the test. In the case of ELISA, it's 0.2%. Multiply that figure times the number of people within our sampling to survey presumed to be HIV negative. Now, once we give that margin for error, multiply it by those we presume are HIV negative, that gives you the false positives. Then we add the false positives to those in that sampling base presumed to be HIV positive, the true positives. That's the total number of people who tested positive. And then divide that total number by those who have been diagnosed false positive. Oh no, who were true positives. So it gives you the positive predictive value. PPV equals true positives divided by false positives plus true positives, or, okay, so I just haven't written it out. And that's just, it's a little complicated, but here basically I'm going to break it down. This shows you the different tests. How many you would expect to be true and false positives. Okay. ELISA tests, true positives, 49%, false positives, 41%. Now that's including everybody, not just low risk, not just high risk. Western blot, 5%, true positives, 95% false positives. Now that's the confirmatory test. They give you this one, then they confirm it with this one. Polymerase chain reaction, the same as ELISA, 49-51. Target, 49-51. Remember the Million Man March? Ali Muhammad held up the little blue vial? Yeah. That test was still experimental for 3 years after that. He should have been sanctioned for that. He was being paid $400,000 a year to test that on black people. I don't like these things.
Who was that?
Ali Muhammad, Dr. Ali Muhammad, held up the Target HIV antibody test. He said, we now have the ability to test for HIV, but the test he held was not approved. It was not approved until 3 years later, 1998. And he was given $400,000 by the National Institutes of Health to use that thing.
In 98?
1995 he held it up. In 1998 it was approved. Now, I know this is disturbing to people, but this is one of the things that I'm charged with a mission is, I got to be honest. If it's wrong, if a Jew is doing it, I can't tolerate it when a black man is doing it, and both him and the Jew are getting paid by the same people. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, if I'm wrong, I can be corrected.
No, that's
But I have the evidence to back up what I'm saying.
That's all we need.
They're over that Chemron, which was another scam. Low-dose oral alpha interferon was another scam. And he said to them, do your tests on it. Do your peer review testing on it. And they did it, and they ripped him apart. So be careful asking somebody to criticize you, and then you left yourself vulnerable. Because they tore him apart, but I could have torn him apart too. So we go through the different tests. Urine strep. The urine, the PP test. Look at this. It got 1.97% true positives and 98.3% false positives. I'm going to show you something about that test right now. The phony HIV antibody test. Watch this. Watch this. This is from Science Magazine. This is the abstract. This is the reference to volume 249, number 4965, page 121. Abstract. Several companies, including Abbott, DuPont, Wellcome Diagnostics, and Kelly Biomedical, have produced new tests to screen for HIV in urine. You saw that one where it showed all the false positives. Watch this. It's wilder than you can ever imagine. to test would make it easier, especially for developing countries with scarce medical facilities. The test screen for HIV, and that includes black people because they do it, and they did it in the African marketplace in LA. They tried to invent me to take this test, and I laughed at the woman. The test screen for HIV in urine, eliminating the need for trained medical personnel who can draw blood. None of the tests has won approval. They later did approve them, but then they withdrew them because the homosexuals told them, get this crap off the market. But after they withdrew them from the market, they were still giving them out free in the black community for at least 2 years afterwards. Wellcome's test kit was the least reliable, with 14 false positives from 325 negative samples. Abbott's test fared better with finding 4 false positives in 236 negative samples. And Khalid's test had 7 false positives from a 931 low-risk samples. Now, I'm going to show you what those really, really mean. Now, you might thought that was acceptable, but only because you don't know. The CDC estimates 142 million persons in the U.S. who fit the category of low risk for HIV infection. These exclude male homosexuals, intravenous drug users, blood products users, or children born to high-risk women. So we would be considered low risk, the 142 million. Of this group, 142 million, the CDC further estimates that 28.4 thousand of them are expected to be infected with HIV, 1 out of every 420. And thus you would have a group of 141,971,600 of this group are expected to be uninfected or HIV negative. You got it? These people are negative. Thus we can calculate the value of the aforementioned urine test for the positive predictive value. Wellcome's test yielded a false positive ratio of 14.325, that was according to their abstract, or 1 out of every 23. Abbott's test yielded a false positive ratio of 4.236, or 1 out of 59. Khalid's yielded a false positive ratio of 7 out of 931, or 133. Now let's measure these numbers against this figure right here. And here's what you get. Using these tests on 142 million low-risk group would have expected to produce a positive reactions at very alarming rates. Wellcome's test would have given us 6.17 million positive reactions versus an expected 28,400. Does everybody see what I just said? We expected 28,400, but using the Wellcome test on everybody, 6.17 million tested HIV positive. Abbott's test, 2.41 million positive reactions versus an expected 28,000. Khalid's, 1.07 million positive reactions versus an expected 28,000. False positive ratios ran very high. Wellcome's false positives were 99.5%, Abbott's were 98.8%, and Khalid's was 97%. These tests are absolutely unacceptable. But wait a minute. I'm going to close with this, and if we have Q&A, and I'm sorry I have to close because I probably could talk for, I literally could talk for about 12 to 20 hours on this. I have about 60 hours of interviews, radio programs, and documentaries in our archive. And I brought, I think, maybe about 40 or 50 hours worth of the stuff with me. About 30 hours of it today. This is them confessing to false positives. Advances in HIV testing technology and their potential impact from AIDS prevention, education prevention. I got this document at the CDC. Even with the accuracy of an EIA, or enzyme immunoassay, a large number of false positive results can be expected. Assuming a specificity of 99.5 and a prevalence among users of 1%, the positive predictive value of the home screening test would be 67%. 33 of 100 positive tests would be false positive. With a lower prevalence of 0.1%, the predictive value drops to 17%, and 0.8 and 83 of 100 positive tests would be false positive. However, as the prevalence falls, a larger proportion of users would be uninfected. With a 0.1% prevalence, 99.9% of tests would, and the word should actually read should, yield negative results. Because they're not yielding negative. Wait a minute. Here's what they say. Are you ready? Are you ready? I got this from another document. I had to read a 42-page document. This was on page 22 or 27 of the document. Watch this. Coming to your clinic. Candidate for rapid test from AIDS alert. Watch this. You're going to be shocked. Whether the tests will perform as well in the U.S. as they have abroad, where abroad, are still unknown, experts add. For one thing, using a single rapid test in a low prevalence population will give a lower positive predictive value. Suppose, for example, a single rapid test that has a 99.4% specificity is administered to 1,000 people, meaning 6 will test false positive. That error rate won't matter much in areas with a high prevalence of HIV because in all probability, the people testing false positive will have the disease. I'm talking about in the housing projects. I'm talking about in the hood. This is the way they got the system set up. But it says, but if the same tests were performed on 1,000 white, affluent, suburban housewives, a low prevalence population, in all likelihood, all positive results will be false and positive predictive values plummet to 0. The white woman is exempt from HIV infection. Now I got to do one more thing. I'm going to skip her because if she's using injection drugs, they'll get it. You know something? I'm gonna have to pull out some papers. Maybe we'll go to Q&A. Because this men on the download thing. There was a study that came out just very recently. Dr. Janice Valerie, a top CDC official. They've been talking about using her studies over the course of years to isolate and identify this men on the down low population. She recently came out and said, you're all lying. My studies never said that. My studies were not studies of men undercover bisexuals. My studies were of homosexual men in gay bars and places where homosexuals came out. And of those population, she found certain numbers. I've actually got the documents. I thought I'd put them in the computer. But she actually said that only 4% of the 15, 20 to 22-year-olds, of which she had studied, I think, 4,300 of them, only 4% had engaged in unprotected bisexual activity in the previous 6 months. And she said of the other group, 22 to 29-year-olds, an even smaller percentage. So just like New Sean Williams, this whole men on the down low thing, just 2 or 3 or 4 brothers per city are infecting all of the women if you believe in the down low. So when Oprah Winfrey, Ogra I call it, brings on a man whose only claim to fame is queer activity and makes him a nationally known, best known author.
That's right.
By talking about what he does, it's mythology. I have been saying for 4 years, I have never been able to find any studies validating the men on the down low. It's mythology. It does not exist. We the lightest point.
This sounds to me like, and I know you're going to do calculations,
Yes.
but this sounds like a very, very evil plot.
The Ku Klux Klan.
Keep us from having
Babies. Yeah. Just a couple more points. Yeah, you're so right, Queen Zinger. You're so right. And the thing is that we bought into it. We got to admit it. In the early days of this, we're going to get to Q&A. Keep your questions. In the early days, I bought into it. That's why I made the commitment myself to do study. Jabbar, you know this. I believed this thing in the first phase. But by 1993, I bought all these documents and stuff, and I'm reading this stuff, and I'm reading the Strecker Memorandum and all this stuff I've been telling people. And I'm looking at it, and I'm saying the more I study this, the more I see that there's blatant contradictions in all of this. In 1993, I said, okay, I reversed my position, and I said it on the back of the book, AIDS Exposed. I said, after examining thousands and thousands of pages and visiting these libraries and buying all these books, I have to reverse my position. I no longer believe in the existence of the HIV virus. I no longer believe in AIDS as a sexually transmitted disease. It takes a lot of heart to denounce the first book you've written on this subject in your second book. It takes a lot of heart to reverse yourself like that. But I had to do it, to be honest. And to this day, I have always said to anybody who believes in it, You can bring me your data, you can bring me your stuff, I will look at all of it, and if it is strong, I reserve the right to reverse my position again and believe in it. But I've debated major world scientists on major media and the people's media and in forums like this, and nobody can take us because we know the weaknesses of the argument. They can't even get past the HIV test. I can destroy the whole thing by saying you can't tell who's positive if you have no test. So if there is no test, there's no epidemic. And in Africa, it's just buck wild. They'll say anything. So we have to have the ability to stop fronting off like we know more than we know. We need to stop quoting the headlines of these news stories and this crap on TV and the rappers out here putting out these songs. We need to stop quoting this stuff as if it is really valid enough to build civilization on. Because you know something? The African American really isn't winning. Because they've been founding too much of their action, their investment on false science. So I think what we're going to do is take a short break, and we come back. We have time for Q&A?
Yeah.
Hey, I can stay as long as you're prepared to stay today. I know you do have obligations today. But this is such a critical situation, and I really do appreciate having the opportunity to show you what we've been able to find out.
We're going to take about a 15-20 minute intermission. We have food downstairs that's available. Brother Keidi, he has his books over here. He can sign some books, tapes, CDs, whatever. We have drinks in the back. We have some reality speaks tapes in the back. And you can network with each other. We'll see you.